The flames painted the night in furious orange, devouring the timber frame of the farmhouse with hungry, crackling jaws. A woman's scream pierced through the roar of the fire, a sound sharp and full of terror. Then it was gone, swallowed by the sound of collapsing beams. A man, Ethan Sullivan, strained against the arms of three others holding him back from the inferno. His voice was raw, just a desperate shred of sound. "Ruth! Ruth!" An older man gripped his shoulders, his face grim in the flickering light. "It's too late, son. You can't go in there." But Ethan's eyes never left the flames. They burned there, reflecting back the destruction of his world. And those same flames reflected in the wide, terrified eyes of a little girl standing just a few yards away. Emma. She was just 4 years old. She clutched a dirty doll to her chest, silent tears streaming down her soot-stained face as she watched the fire eat her home, her life, her mother. The blaze claimed everything that night, everything except a broken father and a silent daughter, left standing in the ashes of what had once been their home. 1 year later, spring of 1817, Providence Gap, Arizona Territory. The sun hung low over the parched earth, casting long, skeletal shadows across the dirt. Josephine Cooper lowered the bucket into the well. The rope was rough against her palms, her muscles tight with an effort she knew all too well. At 18, Jo was accustomed to the weight of things, the weight of responsibility, the weight of the world on her shoulders. Her dark hair was pulled back in a loose braid, tendrils escaping to frame a face weathered far beyond its years. Life hadn't been kind. It had etched lines around her eyes, not from laughter, but from squinting against the harsh realities of her existence. She heard the horse before she saw it, the steady rhythm of hooves against packed earth, growing closer. Closer. Jo knew who it was without even looking. She knew why he had come. The rope slipped through her fingers, and she cursed under her breath as the bucket splashed back into the darkness of the well. With a sigh that carried all the weariness of her young life, she turned to face her visitor. Ethan Sullivan sat tall in the saddle, a dark silhouette against the dying amber sky. His broad shoulders carried an invisible weight, one that seemed to pull at him from the inside, bending but never breaking him. He kept the right side of his face turned away. It was a habit, not an accident, a way of keeping the scarred, ruined flesh hidden in shadow. "Miss Cooper," he said. His voice was like gravel rolling over a dry creek bed. There was no warmth in it, no pleasure at the sight of her, just business, cold, hard business. "Mr. Sullivan." Jo straightened her spine, lifted her chin. She would not cower. She would not show weakness. Not to him, not to anyone. "You're earlier than expected." "6 months is long enough," he replied. He dismounted in a single fluid motion that spoke of a lifetime spent in the saddle. Up close, the hardness in his gray eyes was unmistakable, like chips of winter ice. "Is your father home?" "Where else would he be?" Joe's mouth twitched into a humorless smile. "Waiting for you to take what little we have left." Ethan said nothing to this. He simply tied his horse to the post and walked toward the dilapidated shack that crouched at the edge of town like a wounded animal. Jo followed, the empty bucket forgotten. The whole world seemed to hold its breath. The door creaked open at Ethan's knock. Solomon Cooper stood in the doorway, his shoulders hunched beneath a stained shirt. The stink of whiskey was on his breath, even though the sun had yet to fully set. His face was a roadmap of a man who had taken a wrong turn at every single crossroads life had offered. "Sullivan." The name came out of his mouth like something sour he was trying to spit out. "What the hell do you want?" Ethan's posture didn't change. His voice remained level, dangerously calm. "It's been 6 months. I've come for what you owe." Solomon's laugh was sharp and brittle, like glass breaking. "I don't have it." He gestured around at the shabby interior visible behind him. "Does it look like I'm swimming in silver? That is not my concern." "Not your concern?" Solomon's voice rose, a flush of anger spreading across his weathered cheeks. "The mine's dried up. The fields are dead. You knew that when you lent me the money." Ethan's jaw tightened. It was the only sign that the words had reached him at all. We had an agreement. Agreement? Solomon spat the word like a curse. He swayed slightly, his eyes darting over his shoulder, then back to Ethan with a sudden narrowed calculation. Wait here. Joe felt something cold and heavy settle in her stomach as her father disappeared inside the shack. She knew that look. She had seen it too many times before. The mean glint in his eye. The sudden, desperate calculation. Nothing good ever followed that look. Nothing. A moment passed. Then another. Ethan remained perfectly still, the desert heat pressing into his spine, the silence stretching between them, tight as a wire. Then the door opened wider. Solomon shoved Joe forward by the shoulder. She stumbled, catching herself just before she fell, her bare feet finding purchase on the hard-packed earth. She stood tall as any woman could after being pushed forward like livestock at an auction. This one, Solomon said, gesturing toward Joe with a careless thumb. Useless as a wife, useless as a daughter. Maybe she can be useful to you. Joe's breath caught in her throat. The world narrowed to a single, sharp pinpoint of horror. Not again. Please, not again. Not like her mother. Ethan's eyes didn't flinch, but they turned sharply toward Joe, studying her with an unreadable, intense expression. She's 18, Solomon continued, a sick grin spreading across his face. You got land, money, a little girl that needs raising and no woman to warm your bed. Take her. Call it even. You cannot be serious, Joe whispered, the words clawing their way out of a throat that had suddenly gone dry as dust. Her father's grin vanished, replaced by something hard and ugly. I fed you. I raised you. And for what? You can't even scrub a floor without whining. Do something for once in your miserable life. No. Joe's voice was firmer now, her hands balling into tight fists at her sides. I am not for sale. She tried to turn away, but she was too slow. The slap cracked through the dry air, loud as a thunderclap. Joe fell to the dusty porch floor, her cheek blooming with fiery pain. The taste of copper filled her mouth. You ungrateful brat! Solomon spat, raising his hand to strike her again. You're nothing but dead weight! But the second blow never came. Ethan stepped forward, his movement a blur, catching Solomon's wrist in midair. His grip was like iron. There was something in his eyes now, something beyond simple anger. A cold fire, a dark recognition. Enough, Ethan said. The single word carried the weight of steel. Solomon froze. Perhaps for the first time he saw what truly lurked beneath the scarred, stoic surface of Ethan Sullivan. He lowered his arm, stepping back from the silent threat. Ethan walked past the old man, bent down, and offered Joe his hand. She looked up, dazed, but not crying. Her pride was a fortress, holding strong even as her cheek throbbed and her lip bled. Come with me, Ethan said, his voice low but clear. It wasn't an offer. It wasn't a question. It was a decision that had already been made. Joe stared at his hand, then at his scarred face. For the first time in years, someone had not turned away from her pain. Someone had not dismissed it. Someone had seen her. She thought of her mother, Mariah, and the last words she had whispered before she died. You deserve to live in the light, Josie, not in shadows. Slowly, carefully, Joe placed her hand in Ethan's. The journey to his ranch, a place called Promised Land, took nearly 3 hours. Ethan's wagon moved slowly through the rough terrain, each jolt sending a spike of pain through Joe's bruised face. She sat stiffly beside him, clutching her small bundle of belongings. A change of clothes, her mother's old hairbrush, a tattered book of poems, and a small wooden box buried deep beneath the fabric. They traveled in silence. The space between them was filled only with the creak of the wagon wheels and the occasional snort from the horses. Joe stared straight ahead, refusing to look at the man who, in the span of a few minutes, had become her new keeper. Not her husband, not her father. Something undefined, and therefore all the more terrifying. When the landscape began to change, the rocky outcrops giving way to stretches of wild grass dotted with scrub pine, Joe felt something shift in the air. A scent, maybe. Water and livestock and woods. The smell of a place that was lived in, cared for. "This is it," Ethan said, the first words he'd spoken since they'd left Providence Gap. Joe looked up, and she saw promised land spread out before them. It wasn't what she'd expected. The ranch was vast, stretching across acres of dry earth and yellow grass. Rows of barns and bunkhouses formed a rough semicircle around a main house built of sturdy timber and stone. Horses stamped in a dusty corral. Men moved like clockwork between the buildings, shouting orders and carrying tools. It looked more like a small town than a home, humming with the quiet industry of many hands working toward a common purpose. Ethan guided the wagon to a stop near the main house. He climbed down and came around to Joe's side, offering his hand again. She hesitated, then accepted it, acutely aware of the curious glances from the ranch hands. Her legs were stiff from the journey, and she stumbled slightly as her feet hit the ground. Ethan's hand steadied her at the elbow, and then it was gone. The brief touch left an unexpected warmth on her skin. "Isaiah!" Ethan called. An older black man emerged from the main house. Isaiah Fletcher was tall and lean, with silver hair and deep-set eyes that had seen more of the world than most. He moved with the deliberate grace of a man who had learned early that sudden movements could be dangerous. His gaze fell on Joe, and something flickered across his face. Recognition, perhaps. Or a memory. "This is Josephine Cooper," Ethan said. "She'll be staying with us." Isaiah nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "I'll prepare a room." "The one by the kitchen," Ethan said. "Not the stables." The distinction seemed significant, though Joe couldn't understand why. She'd fully expected to be housed with the animals, like the property she had become. As Isaiah disappeared back into the house, a small figure appeared in the doorway. A little girl with pale blonde curls and solemn, watchful eyes. She was the girl from the fire. She clutched a handkerchief to her chest, one with the letter R embroidered in the corner. "Emma," Ethan said, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. "Come meet Miss Cooper." The child didn't move, her eyes wide and unblinking. Joe felt a strange pull toward her, this silent little girl who seemed to carry a weight far beyond her years. Joe knelt, bringing herself to Emma's eye level. "Hello, Emma," she said softly. "I'm Joe." Emma retreated further into the shadows of the doorway, disappearing from view completely. "She doesn't speak," Ethan said, and there was something raw in his voice. "Not since her mother died." Before Joe could respond, another man approached from the direction of the stables. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a mean set to his mouth that Joe recognized all too well. "New help, boss?" the man asked. His eyes swept over Joe, lingering far longer than was proper. "Miss Cooper will be helping with the house, and with Emma," Ethan said, his tone flat, leaving no room for argument. "Wade Turner, ma'am," the man said, with a mocked tip of his hat. "Ranch manager. Anything you need, you just ask." The words were polite, but the smile that accompanied them was not. It was a predator's smile. Joe nodded stiffly, clutching her bundle tighter. She'd known men like Wade Turner her whole life, men who saw women as things to be used and discarded. "I'll show Miss Cooper to her room," Isaiah said, returning to the porch. "Supper will be ready in an hour." Ethan nodded, then turned to Joe. "Get settled. We'll talk more later." And with that, he strode away toward the stables, leaving Joe standing in the dust with her small bundle of belongings and an ocean of uncertainty threatening to drown her. Isaiah led Joe through the main house. It was larger than it appeared from the outside. The great room held a massive stone fireplace, sturdy furniture, and shelves lined with books. The floors were wooden planks, worn smooth by years of footsteps. Despite its size, the house had a hollow, empty feeling, as if some vital element had been ripped out of it. They passed a closed door with a brass key still in the lock. Isaiah's pace quickened slightly, drawing Joe's attention. "Mr. Sullivan's room," he said simply, offering no further explanation. At the back of the house, Isaiah opened a door to reveal a small but clean room. A narrow bed with a quilt, a washstand with a cracked mirror, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out toward the distant mountains. "It's not much," Isaiah said, "but it's yours. For now." Joe touched her cheek self-consciously. She knew it must be swollen and purple by now. "Thank you," she said, and she meant it. The room was humble, but it was dignified. It was infinitely better than what she'd left behind. Isaiah hesitated at the door. "Miss Cooper, if I may," he began. "This is a decent house, despite appearances. Mr. Sullivan is a fair man. Keeps to himself, but he's fair." There was something in his tone, a warning perhaps, or advice. Mr. Turner, on the other hand. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Best to keep your distance." With that, he left her alone. Joe stood in the center of the room, suddenly overwhelmed. Her cheek throbbed, a physical reminder of what she'd escaped. But what had she escaped into? A better cage was still a cage. She set her bundle on the bed and unwrapped it. Her meager possessions, the worn hairbrush, the tattered book of poems, and the wooden box. Joe lifted the lid. Inside lay a silver locket, tarnished with age, its chain broken. It had been her mother's. Inside was a tiny portrait, faded almost beyond recognition, of a woman with Joe's same dark hair and green eyes. On the back, a single letter was engraved. M. Joe closed the box and slid it under her pillow. Whatever this place was, whatever Ethan Sullivan expected of her, she would endure. She would survive. It was what she had always done. Later that evening, Joe made her way to the kitchen, following the smell of cooking food. Her face had been washed, her hair rebraided. She would face whatever came next with dignity. The kitchen was warm and bright. Isaiah moved about with practiced efficiency. A young, freckled man named Micah was chopping vegetables. He smiled shyly. "Welcome to Promised Land," he said. There was something in the way he said the name, as if it held a secret story she wasn't yet privy to. The kitchen door opened, and Ethan entered. Emma trailed behind him like a small shadow. "Miss Cooper," Ethan said, his eyes finding hers. "I trust you've settled in." "Yes, sir," Joe replied. "Good," he gestured toward the table. "Please sit." The meal was simple but hearty. They ate in silence. Emma ate carefully, her eyes downcast. Ethan seemed lost in thought, his gaze turned inward. Joe found herself studying him when he wasn't looking. The terrible scar that ran from his temple down his cheek and disappeared into his collar. A burn, she realized. The lines of pain around his eyes. The way he kept the scarred side of his face angled away, even at his own table. What had happened to this man? What had happened to the little girl who wouldn't speak? After dinner, Ethan asked Joe to join him in his study. "I want to be clear about your position here," he said, standing by the window. "You are not a servant, nor are you." He paused, searching for the right word. "Property," Joe supplied, her voice carefully neutral. Something flickered in Ethan's eyes. "Regret, maybe. Yes, not property." "Then what am I, Mr. Sullivan?" "An employee," he said. "You'll help with the house and with Emma. In return, you'll have room, board, and a small wage." A wage. Joe blinked in surprise. That had not been part of any arrangement she'd imagined. "Your father's debt is separate," Ethan continued. "That's between him and me. You're not part of that equation." "Yet here I am," Joe said softly. "Here you are," he agreed, "but by choice. If you wish to leave, I won't stop you." Joe almost laughed. Leave to where? With what? She had nothing. "And if I stay?" "Then you abide by the rules of this house," Ethan said. "You look after Emma. You help Isaiah. You stay clear of the bunkhouse and the men." The last part was delivered with a particular emphasis, a clear warning. "One more thing," he added. "Emma. She needs gentleness, since Ruth died." He trailed off, a shadow crossing his face. "Just be patient with her." "I will." Joe promised. As he moved to the door, he paused. "The room you're staying in." It was Ruth's sewing room. Then he was gone. Later, as Joe settled into the narrow bed, she found herself thinking of Ruth Sullivan, the woman whose ghost seemed to fill every corner of this house. Who was she? What happened to her? And why did Joe have the unsettling feeling that her own fate was now tangled up with a dead woman's story? Through the thin walls, she heard the creak of floorboards. Ethan, pacing in his room. Then, the sound of the front door opening and closing. Curious, Joe moved to the window. In the silver wash of moonlight, she saw Ethan standing before a small fenced area at the edge of the property. A graveyard. He placed something on one of the markers, flowers perhaps, and stood with his head bowed. As he turned back toward the house, the moonlight caught his face fully. The scar was more visible now, a rippled path of damaged flesh. But it was his expression that stole Joe's breath. It was naked grief, stripped of the stoic mask he wore in the daylight. For the first time, Joe saw not the hard man who'd taken her from her home, but a broken one, carrying a weight she couldn't yet possibly understand. The first week established a routine. Joe rose early, helped Isaiah, and spent her days cleaning, mending, and keeping a watchful eye on Emma. The child followed her like a silent shadow, never speaking, never smiling. Ethan was often gone, riding out at dawn and returning late. When he was home, he was distant. But she felt his eyes on her sometimes, watching, assessing. Not in the hungry way Wade Turner watched her, but with a complex curiosity, as if he was trying to solve a puzzle. It was during her second week that the unspoken rules of Promised Land became terrifyingly clear. Joe had risen before dawn, hoping to finish the laundry before the heat became unbearable. She carried a basket of sheets to the well, the eastern sky just beginning to lighten. As she lowered the bucket, a shadow fell across her. "Up early, ain't you?" Wade Turner's voice slithered over her like something cold and wet. He leaned against the well, far too close for comfort. "Been wondering what Sullivan's getting that the rest of us aren't." His eyes raked over her. Joe's hands tightened on the rope. "I need to finish this laundry, Mr. Turner. Please excuse me." She tried to step around him, but he moved to block her path. "What's your hurry? Boss ain't even up yet." He reached out, his fingers brushing the inside of her wrist. Joe pulled back quickly, too quickly. The bucket slipped and clanged against the stones of the well. As she bent to retrieve it, Wade stepped forward and planted his boot firmly on the edge of her skirt, trapping her. "Oops," he muttered, the word dripping with false innocence. She was pinned, kneeling in the dirt. Humiliated. "Get your boot off her skirt. Now." The voice cut through the morning air like a blade. Wade froze. Joe looked up. Ethan was standing a few yards away. He held Emma's hand. He gently set the little girl down, his eyes never leaving Wade. "Go find Isaiah, sweetheart," he said softly. Emma scurried toward the house. Wade removed his foot, a nervous smile spreading across his face. "Just having a bit of fun, boss." Ethan walked forward slowly, deliberately. Without a single word, he drew back his fist and punched Wade square in the face. The man collapsed in the dust. Ethan looked around at the few ranch hands who had gathered. "Anyone else want to test where I draw the line?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Silence. Ethan turned to Joe and offered his hand, pulling her to her feet. His voice dropped to a whisper only she could hear. "If anyone makes you feel unsafe, including me, you tell me. This is your home now. Home." The word struck something fragile inside her. Before she could respond, small fingers slipped into hers. Emma had returned, standing silently at her side. "Papa," the child whispered, the word so soft Joe almost missed it. "Is she staying with us?" Ethan looked at Joe, a long, searching look that was both a question and an answer. He nodded. And from that day on, no one touched Joe. No one even whispered a misplaced word. She worked as before, but now with a sense of security she hadn't known was possible. Emma began to shadow her more openly, her silent presence a comfort. One evening, As Joe sat on the porch mending one of Emma's dresses, Isaiah joined her. "You're good with her," he said, nodding toward Emma, who was drawing in the dirt nearby. "She's taken to you." "She's easy to care for," Joe replied. Isaiah smiled. "She reminds me of her mother that way." Ruth was always watching, always noticing things others missed. This was the first time anyone had spoken of Ruth directly to her. "What was she like?" Joe asked softly. "Kind," Isaiah said finally. "Educated. She was a school teacher before she married Mr. Sullivan. Taught him to read, you know." Joe blinked in surprise. "Ethan couldn't read?" "Not when they met," Isaiah confirmed. "He wanted to learn for her. Ruth saw something in him that others didn't." Joe thought of the books in Ethan's study. The idea that he had learned to read for love shifted her understanding of him completely. "How did she die?" The question slipped out before Joe could stop it. Isaiah's face clouded. "Fire," he said simply. "Terrible thing. Mr. Sullivan was trying to save her. That's how he got the scars." Joe's hands tightened on the fabric. It made a painful kind of sense now. The naked grief, the haunted eyes, the fire. That night, a storm rolled in, bringing rare, precious rain. Joe stood at her window, watching lightning split the sky. A soft whimper came from the hallway. She opened her door to find Emma standing there, trembling as thunder crashed overhead. Without a word, Joe knelt and opened her arms. The child launched herself forward. Joe carried her back to the bed, humming a soft melody her mother had once sung to her during storms. Gradually, Emma's trembling subsided. Joe hadn't heard the footsteps, but suddenly Ethan was there in the doorway, his face etched with concern. He took in the scene, his daughter curled against Joe, finally at peace. "Thank you," he said softly. The depth of feeling in those two simple words took Joe by surprise. As he turned to go, he paused. "She used to love storms," he said quietly. "Before, she and Ruth would sit on the porch and count the seconds between the lightning and thunder." The admission felt like a gift, a small piece of the puzzle. "Perhaps you'll love them again someday," Joe offered. "Perhaps," he agreed, though his voice held little hope. As he walked away, Joe settled back against the pillows, Emma warm and solid in her arms. The storm raged outside. But inside, something had shifted. Something had broken, and something new was beginning to grow. The rain fell hard for days, a cold, soaking storm. Joe, exhausted from hauling extra firewood, fell ill. By morning, she could barely sit up. A fever burned through her. As she drifted in a haze of sickness, a small figure tiptoed into her room. It was Emma, carefully carrying a cup of water. "Miss Joe," she whispered. The little girl climbed into the narrow cot beside her. "You're sick," Emma said simply, her second full sentence. "I will keep you warm." She curled up close, her small hand taking Joe's. Minutes later, the door creaked open. Ethan stepped in, a pouch of medicine in his hand. He froze, his breath catching in his chest. There, in the dim morning light, was his daughter, curled up beside the woman he had brought here as payment for a debt. The woman who held her gently, protectively, even in a fevered sleep. He had not seen his daughter sleep like that since Ruth died. He swallowed the lump in his throat. As he turned to leave, Emma stirred, blinking up at him. "Papa," she whispered, her small hand reaching out to touch his scarred cheek. "She's staying, right?" Ethan covered his daughter's hand with his own. "Yes," he whispered. "She's staying. No matter what." For 2 days, Joe drifted in and out of consciousness. Isaiah brought her herbal teas. Emma rarely left her side. And Ethan. Ethan came when he thought she was sleeping, sitting in the chair beside her bed, reading aloud from one of Ruth's books. His voice was rough, but gentle. Once, between waking and dreaming, she felt him take her hand. "Fight, Joe," he'd whispered. "We need you here." On the 3rd day, the fever broke. Joe woke to find sunlight streaming through the window and Emma asleep in the chair beside her, a book open in her lap. Emma's eyes flew open. She broke into a smile that transformed her solemn face. "You're better." "I am," Joe agreed, her voice raspy. "Thanks to you." The door opened and Ethan stood there, relief washing over his features. "Welcome back," he said. There was something different in his gaze now. Warmer. The lines between them had blurred, the distance closing in ways neither had anticipated. Later that evening, Emma brought her the book of stories. The child curled up beside her as Joe began to read. From the doorway, Ethan watched silently. For the first time since Ruth's death, his house felt like a home again. But just as the peace settled over them, the sharp sound of a horse's whinny cut through the night. Ethan tensed, moving to the window. A lone rider approached in the gathering dusk, swaying in the saddle. "Isaiah," Ethan called, his voice tight. "Take Emma to the kitchen." Joe rose unsteadily. "What is it? Who's there?" Ethan's jaw was set like stone. "Your father." Solomon Cooper dismounted in the yard, nearly stumbling. He looked smug, his eyes bloodshot. "Sullivan," he slurred, "you have something of mine." "You forfeited your debt," Ethan's reply was controlled. Solomon chuckled. "I ain't talking about money. I'm talking about my girl." Joe stepped onto the porch behind Ethan, her spine straight. "What do you want?" she asked. Solomon grinned, revealing stained teeth. "There's a man in Dry Creek, owns a feed store. Old, no teeth, but plenty of money. Said he'll marry you. Pay good money for a young wife." Joe's blood ran cold. Behind them, Emma appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide with fear. "Emma, go inside," Ethan said firmly. But the child shook her head, her small hand finding Joe's. "No," she whispered. "You stay." Solomon laughed. "Look at that. She's gotten attached." He took a step toward the porch. "I'm not going with you," Joe said, her voice clear and strong. "Not now. Not ever." "You'll do as you're told." Solomon lunged forward, but Ethan was faster. He caught the older man by the collar. "She's made her choice," Ethan said. "Leave now." Solomon spat at Ethan's feet. "This ain't over," he growled, stumbling back to his horse. As he rode away, he fixed Joe with a last venomous glare. "You're just like your mother, thinking you're too good for your own kind. She ended up in the ground, and so will you." Joe stood frozen, Solomon's words echoing in her mind. Ethan turned to her. "You're safe here." "Why?" she asked. "Why protect me? I'm nothing to you." "You're not nothing," he said. "Not to Emma, not to this house, not to me." Before she could process his words, a sudden gust of wind swept across the land. It carried with it the acrid, unmistakable scent of smoke. Ethan's head snapped up, his eyes scanning the horizon. A faint orange glow was visible to the east, where the old supply barn stood. "Fire," he said, the word charged with a terrible familiar dread. The word hung in the air. Then Ethan was moving, shouting, running for the stables. Joe turned toward the house, a horrifying thought striking her. "Emma!" The child wasn't in the kitchen. She wasn't in her room. "Emma!" Joe called, panic rising in her throat. Joe knew. She knew with the chilling certainty of a mother's instinct where Emma had gone. The little girl had been upset. And when Emma was upset, she hid. She hid in the loft of the old barn to draw, the barn that was now on fire. Joe ran outside, ignoring her still weak legs. The orange glow was brighter now, flames licking up the side of the old wooden structure. Men were forming a bucket line, but the fire was spreading too quickly. Ethan was at the front, barking orders. "Emma!" Joe gasped, grabbing his arm. "She might be in there." The color drained from Ethan's face. Before he could move, Joe was past him, running headlong into the smoke and heat. The air inside was thick and black, searing her lungs. "Emma!" she shouted, coughing. Through the haze, she saw the ladder to the loft. It was already burning, but she forced herself up, each rung hot against her palms. In the loft, huddled behind a stack of hay bales, was a small figure. "Joe," Emma whimpered, "I'm here, sweetheart. We need to go now." A loud crack came from above. A beam was giving way. Joe threw herself over Emma as wood and burning hay crashed down around them. Pain seared across her back, but she held tight, shielding the child. The ladder was engulfed in flames. No way down. Joe spotted the loft window. She pushed Emma toward it, climbed onto a stack of hay bales, and kicked the window out. Below was a 15-foot drop. "I'm going to lower you down," she told the child. "Then let go and roll. Remember?" Emma nodded, her eyes huge but trusting. Joe lowered her as far as she could, then released her. The little girl landed with a thud but scrambled to her feet. "Run to your father!" Joe called. But as she prepared to jump, the hem of her dress caught on a nail. Flames from a nearby bale leaped onto the fabric. Fire raced up her side, hungry and hot. Joe cried out, frantically tearing at her skirt. With a final desperate effort, she ripped the burning fabric free and jumped. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs. She felt something snap in her ankle. But the greater pain was the fire still eating at her dress, searing her flesh. Hands were on her. Ethan's hands, rolling her in the dirt, smothering the flames. His face above hers was wild with fear. "Joe, stay with me!" She tried to speak, but only darkness answered. Joe woke to the cool touch of a wet cloth and the soft murmur of voices. She was in her room, lying on her stomach, her back and side a landscape of pain. "Emma?" she rasped. "She's safe," Ethan said from beside the bed. "Thanks to you." Relief washed through her. "The barn's gone," he said grimly. "But buildings can be replaced." He held a cup of water to her lips. "The doctor's been. Burns on your back and side. A broken ankle. He says you'll heal." "I'm sorry about the barn," she whispered. Ethan made a sound, a strange mix of a laugh and a curse. "You saved my daughter's life, and you apologize about a barn? Joe Cooper, you are unlike any woman I have ever known." He rose to go, but Joe caught his hand. "Stay," she whispered. "Please." He settled back into the chair, and as Joe drifted off, she felt his hand warm and solid in hers. Later, she woke to find Emma in the chair. "Does it hurt very bad?" the child asked. "Not too bad," Joe lied. "I'm just glad you're safe." Emma's lower lip trembled. "You were brave. You came for me." "I'll always come for you," Joe promised. "Always." Emma's face transformed with a smile, wide and bright. "I love you, Joe," she said, the words tumbling out, easy and natural. "I love you too, Emma." Joe's heart swelled, almost painfully. The little girl leaned forward and placed a gentle kiss on her cheek. That night, after Emma was asleep, Ethan returned. He sat in the chair beside her bed. Slowly, deliberately, he began to roll up his sleeve, revealing the terrible burn scars that covered his arm. "The fire that killed Ruth," he said quietly. "I was too late. I tried to get to her, but—" He gestured to his scars. "This was all I got for my trouble, and a lifetime of regret." He looked at her, his voice rough with emotion. "When I saw you run into that barn, I thought I was going to lose another person I—" He trailed off. "Care about?" Joe suggested softly. Ethan met her gaze, his eyes vulnerable. "Yes," he admitted. "Against all reason, against all intention, I care about you, Joe Cooper." The confession hung in the air. "I care about you, too," she whispered. His hand found hers on the blanket. "There's something I need to tell you," Ethan said eventually. "Something about your mother." Joe's breath caught. "Isaiah recognized you the moment you arrived. He knew Mariah Cooper, years ago." "How?" "Mariah worked here," Ethan explained. "At Promised Land, before she married your father." The revelation stunned Joe. Her mother here, in this very house. Why did she leave? Ethan's expression darkened. "That's a longer story, but I promise I will tell you everything I know." He adjusted the blanket over her. "Rest now." As he moved to the door, Joe called after him. "Ethan." He turned. "Thank you," she said simply, "for giving me a home." A change came over his eyes, a softening, a surrender. "Thank you," he replied, "for making it one again." Joe's recovery was slow. The burns healed, leaving tender pink skin. Her ankle mended. Through it all, Emma was her constant shadow, chattering away, the wall of silence completely shattered. Ethan, too, was changed. The hard edges had softened. He spent more time at the house, and in the quiet evenings, he and Joe would talk for hours. But the promised conversation about her mother remained unspoken, a ghost between them. Nearly 3 weeks after the fire, Joe was sitting on the porch when two riders approached. One was Ethan. The other was a stranger, a well-dressed older man. "Joe," Ethan said, his voice tight with a tension she couldn't read. "This is Judge Morris from Dry Creek." The name struck Joe like a physical blow. The widower Solomon had mentioned. The man who wanted to buy himself a young wife. "Miss Cooper," Judge Morris said, his voice oily smooth. "A pleasure. Your father has arranged our marriage. I've come to collect you." The blood drained from Joe's face. "It's all quite proper," Morris continued. "The papers are signed. The bride price has been advanced." "I'm not a cow at auction," Joe said, her voice shaking with rage. "You have no right to refuse," Morris's voice hardened. "Your father has offered you in settlement of his debts. Your consent is not required." Ethan stepped between them. "Judge Morris, Miss Cooper isn't going anywhere against her will." "Mr. Sullivan," the judge smiled thinly, "this is a legal matter. Miss Cooper is his property to dispose of as he sees fit." Suddenly Emma, who had slipped outside, spoke up, her voice high and firm. "No, Joe stays here." "Young lady, adults are speaking," Morris snapped. "She's right," Joe said, drawing strength from the child. "I'm not leaving." "Miss Cooper, I don't think you understand your position," the judge's voice turned to ice. "Your father's debts are considerable. You are the payment." "This conversation is over," Ethan interjected. "I suggest you return to Dry Creek, alone." The judge's eyes narrowed. "You would do well to remember who holds authority in this territory, Mr. Sullivan. I could make things very difficult for you." With a final, cold nod, he turned and rode away. "He'll be back," Joe said quietly, "with Solomon." That evening, after Emma was asleep, Joe and Ethan sat on the porch. "He wasn't lying," Joe said finally. "About the law. Women are property." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "There are laws," he said slowly. "And then there's what's right." "Why would you fight for me?" she asked softly. "It would be easier to let me go." Ethan's eyes met hers. "Nothing about you has ever been easy, Joe Cooper," he said, a hint of a smile on his lips. "But some things are worth the struggle." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. "I've been waiting for the right moment to give you this. I think that moment is now." Joe took the paper. It was a letter. The handwriting was her mother's. "My dearest E," it began. "I cannot stay, though my heart breaks to leave. S suspects, and his jealousy knows no bounds. I fear what he might do if he knew the truth. Take care of our secret. Keep it safe until the day comes when truth can emerge. I will find a way to return, to bring what is precious back to where it belongs. With all my love, M." Joe looked up at Ethan, her mind reeling. "I don't understand. Who is E? What secret?" Ethan's face was solemn in the lantern light. "E was Ezra Sullivan," he said quietly. "My father." The world seemed to tilt. "Your father?" "My mother and your father were in love," Ethan finished for her, "before she was forced to marry Solomon." "But the letter," Joe whispered. "She mentions a secret, something precious." Ethan reached for her hand, holding it gently. "You, Joe," he said softly. "The secret was you." Joe stared at him, the impossible truth dawning. "No, Solomon is my father." "Solomon Cooper is the man who raised you," Ethan corrected gently. "But Ezra Sullivan was your father by blood." The truth crashed over her. Ezra Sullivan, not Solomon Cooper, which meant... "You're my brother?" she asked, the words barely a breath. "Half-brother," Ethan clarified. "We share a father." Joe felt the ground pulled out from under her. Her entire life was a lie. The man who had treated her with such cruelty was not her father. And Ethan, the man who had taken her in, the man who had awoken feelings in her that were anything but sisterly, those feelings were now impossible, forbidden. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I wasn't certain at first, Ethan admitted, until Isaiah recognized you. He was my father's closest friend. He knew about the affair, about your mother's pregnancy. She never told me, Joe said quietly. She was protecting you, Ethan said. Solomon is not a man who would have accepted raising another man's child, especially the child of a Sullivan. The pieces began to fall into a terrible, tragic picture. Her mother's quiet sadness, her insistence that Joe learn to read, her long, wistful gazes toward the east, toward Promised Land. Did he know? She asked, her voice a whisper. Did Ezra Sullivan know about me? He suspected, Ethan said. He searched for your mother for years. By the time he found her, she was married to Solomon, and you had been born. Solomon claimed you as his own. To challenge it would have only brought hardship to your mother. So my father left. He came back here and built this ranch. He named it Promised Land because he made a promise to your mother that there would always be a place here for her. And for you. Joe looked around at the sprawling ranch, seeing it with new eyes. A sanctuary built on a secret promise. I don't know who I am anymore, she admitted. Ethan's scarred face was soft in the lantern light. You're still the woman who ran into a burning building to save my daughter. Your blood doesn't define you, Joe. Your choices do. His touch was a steady anchor, but the word brother echoed between them. A new, uncrossable chasm had opened up. She withdrew her hand. The feelings she'd had for him were now a source of shame. I should rest, she said, rising with her crutch. It's been a lot. At the door, she paused. Thank you, she said, for telling me the truth. You deserve to know, Ethan replied. In the days ahead, you'll need to know. Solomon won't give up easily, neither will Judge Morris. But now you understand what's really at stake. Joe lay in the darkness, her mother's letter clutched in her hand. The full weight of her mother's sacrifice, her silent courage, crashed down upon her, and a cold fear bloomed in her heart. What would Solomon Cooper, a violent and bitter man, do if he ever learned the truth? What would he do if he found out the daughter he treated like property wasn't even his to sell? She woke before dawn, her mind still racing. In the kitchen, Isaiah was already kneading dough by lamplight. Couldn't sleep, Joe admitted. The old man smiled faintly. Your mother was always Miss Mariah to me, even when we became friends. You knew her well, Joe stated. I did, Isaiah said. She was luminous. That's what Mr. Ezra used to say, like she carried her own light. He told her the story, how Solomon Cooper had come to the ranch, seen Mariah, and become obsessed, how he'd started spreading rumors, how Mariah, to protect Ezra's reputation, had made a terrible choice. She had gone to Solomon willingly, believing it would be temporary, but he had taken her north and married her in haste, trapping her in a life she never wanted. When did you recognize me? Joe asked. The moment Ethan brought you through that door, Isaiah said. You have her eyes. It was like seeing a ghost, a piece of promised land that had found its way home. Home. Just then, Emma appeared in the doorway, sleepy and small. She climbed into Joe's lap. I had a bad dream, she whispered. The bad man came back. He tried to take you away. It was just a dream, sweetheart, Joe soothed. But even as she said it, she wondered. The battle for her future was only just beginning. An hour later, Ethan found them in the kitchen, a warm domestic scene. But as he stepped inside, the sound of approaching horses shattered the peace. Many horses moving fast. Ethan's expression hardened instantly. He moved to the window. Isaiah, he said, his voice tight. Take Emma to the cellar, now. What is it? Joe asked, grabbing her crutch. Solomon Cooper, Ethan replied grimly. And he's not alone. Outside, at least a dozen riders were dismounting in the yard. At the front sat Solomon Cooper, looking more sober and determined than Joe had ever seen him. Beside him, Judge Morris surveyed the ranch with cold calculation. "They've come for me," Joe said, her voice steady. "They can try," Ethan replied, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. "Stay inside." "No," Joe said firmly. "This is about me. I won't hide." Ethan looked at her, a mixture of admiration and exasperation in his eyes. He nodded once, then offered his arm for support. Together, they stepped onto the porch. "Sullivan!" Solomon called. "I've come for what's mine." Ethan's ranch hands had gathered behind them, a protective wall. Wade Turner stood at the forefront, shotgun in hand. "Cooper," Ethan replied evenly. "You're trespassing." "Nothing unfriendly about a father claiming his daughter," Solomon sneered. "Judge Morris here has the legal documents." Judge Morris stepped forward. "Mr. Sullivan, I have a legal writ. It orders Josephine Cooper's return to her father's custody. Immediately." "And if I refuse?" Ethan asked calmly. "Then you'll be in violation of territorial law," Morris replied smoothly. "Subject to fines, imprisonment, and seizure of this property." The threat hung heavy in the air. The entire ranch was at risk. "There's something you should know, Judge," Ethan said. "Something that changes everything." He looked at Joe, a silent question. She nodded. "Josephine is not your daughter, Cooper," Ethan's voice rang out across the yard. "She's Ezra Sullivan's child, my half-sister." A stunned silence fell over the yard. Solomon's face twisted with shock, then disbelief, then pure, unadulterated fury. "Liar!" he spat. "You're making this up!" "We have proof," Joe said, pulling her mother's letter from her pocket. "My mother's own words." Solomon lunged forward, his face a mask of rage. "You! I always knew! I always knew you weren't mine!" Wade Turner stepped in his path, shotgun raised. "That's far enough, Cooper." "You think this changes anything, Sullivan?" Solomon roared. "You think I give a damn whose blood she has? I raised her. She's mine by law." Judge Morris had gone very still. "Is this true, Cooper? The girl is not your natural daughter? What difference does it make?" "It makes a considerable difference," Morris replied coldly. "Our arrangement was predicated on certain expectations. I have no interest in another man's leavings." The crude dismissal made Joe flinch, but she kept her chin high. "Judge Morris," Ethan said, "I suggest you take your men and leave." Morris studied them for a long moment, then nodded. "This appears to be a family dispute. Good day, Mr. Sullivan. Miss Sullivan, I presume." He and his men rode away. Solomon let out a roar of frustration. "This isn't over. You Sullivans took everything from me. My wife's heart, my daughter's loyalty." "My father didn't steal." Ethan's voice was like ice. "Mariah came to him freely. The only thief here is you." "She was mine," Solomon hissed. "But she never stopped pining for your father, never stopped looking east toward this place. Even on her deathbed, it was his name she whispered, not mine." The admission struck Joe like a blow. Her mother had been faithful to her lost love, even to the very end. "Leave, Cooper," Ethan said quietly. "Josephine stays here, where she belongs." Solomon's gaze shifted to Joe, years of resentment burning in his eyes. "You think you've won, girl? You're still nothing, unwanted, just like your mother." Joe straightened, drawing strength from Ethan's presence. "My mother was wanted," she said clearly. "She was loved, and so am I." Solomon stared, his face a battlefield of rage and loss. Without another word, he turned and rode away. The ranch hands watched until he disappeared. Only then did Joe allow herself to sag against Ethan. "Is he gone for good?" "No," Ethan admitted. "Men like him don't accept defeat. He'll be back." A short while later, Isaiah appeared with Emma. The child ran to them. "The bad man is gone?" "He's gone, sweetheart," Joe assured her. Emma looked up, her eyes serious. "Are you really Papa's sister?" The question caught Joe off guard. Isaiah said you're family now. For real. Yes, Joe said, the truth still strange on her tongue. I am your papa's half-sister. So, you're my aunt? Emma asked. I suppose I am. But you'll still be my Joe too, right? The child's simple question brought tears to Joe's eyes. Always. But she knew it wasn't true. Everything had changed. Her identity, her place, her relationship to everyone here. The ripples of this day would be felt for a long, long time. After Emma was in bed, Ethan invited Joe to his study. He unlocked a drawer and removed a small wooden box. Inside was a gold locket. He handed it to her. Joe opened it. Inside was a miniature portrait of her mother, young and vibrant, the woman she'd never known. He never stopped loving her, Ethan said softly, even after he married Ruth. She never stopped loving him either, Joe whispered. My father left a will, Ethan said. It mentioned a child of Mariah Cooper, should one ever be found. You have inheritance rights, Joe. She didn't want anything. This was his home. Ours now, Ethan corrected gently. The idea of owning anything was overwhelming. But here, finally, was a place she belonged. A home. Weeks passed. Joe's ankle healed. Emma blossomed. And a new kind of closeness grew between Joe and Ethan. The easy companionship of siblings. They rode the ranch together, and in the evenings they talked. Slowly, a new family was forming, bound by choice as much as by blood. One evening, nearly a month later, Ethan brought news. Solomon Cooper has been drinking heavily, he said, making threats. Will he come back? Eventually, Ethan replied. I've spoken with a lawyer. He's drawing up papers that formally acknowledge you as my half-sister. It will give you legal protection from any claim Cooper might make. He paused. There's more. My father's will. He left instructions for a trust to be established in your name. It includes a parcel of land at the eastern edge of Promised Land. 500 acres, with water rights and timber. 500 acres. It was a fortune. It's your birthright, Ethan said simply. Land of your own, independent. The magnitude of the gift left her speechless. Does it have a name? She asked. A small smile touched Ethan's lips. My father called it Mariah's Hope. He always believed she would come back to it someday. The next morning, they rode out at dawn. They rode east, into a part of the ranch Joe had never seen. After 2 hours, Ethan reined in his horse. There, he said, pointing to the valley below. That's Mariah's Hope. It was a hidden paradise, a sheltered valley with a clear stream and meadows dotted with wildflowers. It's perfect, Joe whispered. My father chose it for your mother, Ethan said quietly. He said it reminded him of her. Beautiful, but strong. He led her to a large, sun-warmed rock. This is where they used to meet. Then he pointed to a stand of pines. There's a cabin there. My father built it for her. A surprise he never got to give her. Joe's eyes widened. They rode to the cabin, a small, perfect structure of logs and stone. Ethan unlocked the door. Inside, it was simple but lovingly crafted. He built this with his own hands, Ethan said. Every beam, every joint. By the time it was finished, your mother was gone. Joe stood by the window, the ache of what might have been a physical pain. They were halfway back to the main house when Ethan's body tensed. Joe followed his gaze. A column of dark smoke was rising from the direction of the ranch. Fire, Ethan said, the word tight with dread. He spurred his horse into a gallop. Joe followed, fear a cold knot in her stomach. As they crested the final rise, the full horror came into view. The main house of Promised Land was engulfed in flames, and standing in the yard, watching the destruction with a look of cruel satisfaction, was Solomon Cooper. Ethan's horse thundered into the yard. Joe was close behind, her heart hammering. Solomon turned, a whiskey bottle in one hand, a lit torch in the other. Welcome home, Sullivan, he slurred. Quite a homecoming, ain't it? Where's Emma? Ethan demanded, his hand on his gun. Where is my daughter? Solomon's grin widened. The little girl? Safe. That old Negro of yours got her out. He gestured toward the barn. Isaiah stood there, clutching Emma in his arms. Relief washed through Joe, quickly replaced by a cold fury. Why? She asked, the single word holding a lifetime of pain. Why would you do this? Solomon's gaze fixed on her. You think you can just walk away from me, girl? Everything you are, you owe to me. I owe you nothing, Joe replied. You never wanted me. You never loved me. Love? Solomon scoffed. What does a bastard like you know about love? Your real father didn't love you enough to find you. And these Sullivans, they only want you for your precious legacy. He swung the torch toward the nearest barn. Before it could connect, a shot rang out. The torch flew from Solomon's hand. Wade Turner stood nearby, a rifle raised. Next one goes through your heart, Cooper, he said. Solomon stared at his bleeding hand, then at the ring of grim-faced ranch hands surrounding him. The drunken bravado drained from him. Go home, Solomon, Joe said, her voice quiet but firm. There's nothing for you here anymore. Something in his eyes broke. A recognition that the last tie to Mariah, to the life he'd tried to own, was gone forever. You're just like her, he said, his voice suddenly old and tired. She never belonged to me either. He staggered to his horse and rode away. They watched him go. Then their attention turned back to the inferno. A section of the roof collapsed with a terrible groan. Let it go, Ethan called to the men. Get clear. They gathered in a somber group, watching the heart of Promised Land burn to the ground. What now? Joe asked, tears streaming down her face. Ethan's arm came around her shoulders. We rebuild, he said simply. Promised Land is more than timber and nails. It's the land, the people, the family that holds it together. Family. The word resonated deep inside her. We could stay at the cabin, she suggested, the idea forming as she spoke, at Mariah's Hope, while we rebuild. A look of wonder crossed Ethan's face. It was built for family, she said quietly. It's time, it served its purpose. That night, a small caravan made its way to Mariah's Hope. In the darkness, Joe unlocked the cabin door. Isaiah lit a lantern, and the golden light chased the shadows from the corners, bringing warmth to the cold hearth. It was small, but it was a refuge. It was a home. Later, after Emma was asleep, Joe and Ethan sat before the newly lit fire. Thank you, Ethan said quietly, for opening this place to us. It feels right, Joe replied, as if this is how it was always meant to be. In the ashes of the old house, the ranch hands found something, a metal box, blistered by the heat, but intact. It was Ruth's, filled with her treasures. Emma's baby shoes, a pressed flower, a small, carved wooden bird. Papa made this for her, Emma explained to Joe. As they sorted through the memories, they began to plan. A new house, stronger and more welcoming than the last, with bigger windows for Emma, an east-facing kitchen for Joe, and a wide porch with a swing for all of them. From the ashes of Solomon's revenge, a new future was taking shape. Weeks later, a lawyer arrived. Joe signed the papers. She was officially Josephine Sullivan, co-owner of Promised Land, and sole owner of Mariah's Hope. The lawyer then handed her a sealed envelope. It was a letter from her father, Ezra Sullivan, written years ago. My dear child, it began. If you are reading these words, then a miracle has occurred. Know that you were wanted, deeply, completely. I write in hope that you have arrived where you belong. Joe pressed the letter to her heart. The love of a father she had never met reached across time and death to welcome her home. That evening, she made a decision. I want to develop this land, she told Ethan. Orchards, horses, gardens. I want to make it what my father and mother dreamed it could be. It will take work, Ethan cautioned. Then I'll work, she replied. I'd like to ask for a loan, not a gift. A business proposition. A slow smile spread across Ethan's face. You are every inch a Sullivan. Stubborn, independent. It's a yes. By autumn, the new house at Promised Land was nearly complete. Mariah's hope had been transformed into a working homestead. They decided to have a celebration, a housewarming and a harvest festival. The valley filled with friends and neighbors. Ethan stood on the cabin porch, Joe and Emma beside him. He raised his glass. My father named this ranch Promised Land because he believed in futures yet unwritten. He was right. What was lost has been found. What was broken has been mended. What was promised has been fulfilled. He turned to Joe, taking her hand. A roar of approval went up from the crowd. Later, as the party moved to the new house, the first snowflakes began to fall. Ethan rode alongside Joe. "Welcome home, sister," he said. Joe looked at the glowing windows of the new house, at the man beside her, at the child who had captured her heart. "Home," she replied, the word carrying all the weight of her journey and all the hope of her future. "Yes, I believe it is." If you enjoyed this story of a family forged in fire and truth, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a tale of justice and redemption.